Hello! Welcome to DnDTime Talks. Sorry, where we discuss all things Dungeons and Dragons. I'm Pete.
I'm Jeremy. Pete, how are you on this fine Wednesday?
It is. I've been wed. I didn't get married today. I'm not going to say
Chat,
that. I'm not going to make that joke.
If Pete's been wed, have you been Nest Day? What is Nest Day?
That's gonna be when Smash comes out, and I just play Ness all day. I'm so excited for this. All I can think about is Super Smash Brothers. It's on my brain. It's my desktop background. I'm breathing Smash right now.
Nice.
You guys are gonna see lots of Super Smash Brothers references bleeding into my D&D games.
I'm okay.
Not in mine. Not intentionally.
Wait, you know what? Maybe they will just... Anyway, not the point. Hello, everyone. I think we got a whole bunch of people hanging out in chat. Jericho, Diadems, Farful, and all the rest of y'all folks. I see Psychopath and Sword. We're here hanging out too.
Hi.
How you guys all doing? It's an exciting day. And I guess for everyone else in the chat, including the possibility of new viewers who aren't familiar with our show, this is DnDTime Talks, where Pete and I pick a subject and we just kind of talk about it for a while. You guys can type along in chat and we will kind of be watching that and responding to those comments as we go. And yeah, it should be really exciting. We're talking about a really cool topic today, right, Pete?
Yes, it's a huge topic. I see that my face is frozen in a delightful pose, as is often the case.
No, Pete. Why did you wait?
I don't know. I like as far as the poses, as far as my face poses have been. I kind of like that one.
Guys, Skype, this is a new error Skype is giving us tonight, folks.
I don't know.
Classic.
Nothing is real.
Let's try again, Pete. Let's try again. We're gonna try again. Pete, can you reconnect your video? Just turn your camera off and on.
Working on it. In the meanwhile.
All right, let's try this again. In the meanwhile,
yes, we're talking about NPCs tonight. NPCs and Villains. How to make them interesting, how to make them memorable, how to make them cool. It's a huge topic. We're going to only barely scratch the surface of it over the course of this conversation. But it's one that I think people really like this topic. When you're DMing, building cool NPCs and NPCs that your players like and get the chance to interact with can be one of the most fun things, and it's also one of the flashiest DM things you can do. The DMs that kind of get a lot of recognition, I feel like, tend to be the ones that have really strong NPC work. Quote the most obvious one, Matt Mercer is the big one on that particular regard. And I think his NPCs are a lot of why Matt Mercer kind of is who he is.
Oh, absolutely. NPCs are kind of also, because, Pete just mentioned some of the biggest DMs are known for their NPCs. Well, NPCs are kind of like one of the biggest factors in the game. Maybe people overblow them a little bit, but they're in terms of how your characters interact with the story. NPCs is the way they do that. That's how they learn about the world. It's how they explore the world, and it's really what players become attached to, right? As they play, what they care about is these NPCs in the world. So usually it's not like, oh my god, I really love this town and the wall around it, and I love it so much, and I'm so mad the dragon burned it down. Usually it's more like, oh my god, the dragon killed my favorite NPC innkeeper on the night of their wedding! Right? That's what they care about.
I really want to now try and make my players love a wall, though. You've created
but you'd have to personify the wall, and in doing so make it an NPC.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm wondering, is if you could do it and just have it remain as an object and still create an object that players really love. I guess
it's just the wall is so cool that they love it.
Just a magic item, I guess. Just take away their sword, and that's like taking away an NPC. Take away their big +3 magic weapon. But we digress a bit. So yeah, we're going to be going over how to make NPCs kind of leave those impressions and how to, just make them generally more interesting. And we're going to be talking about just as much kind of non-player characters as we are going to be talking about villains. As villains are one of the, I wouldn't even know if I want to say one of the most important. I am going to say one of the most important to hedge myself a little bit, but probably the most important NPCs in your game. So we're going to be talking about villains too, because they fall into that category. And just to
Yeah.
be clear, as we kind of are starting to dive into this topic, for anyone not familiar with the term NPC, it means non-player character, and that is anyone in the game that is run by the GM. Um, Shopkeepers, townspeople, villains, even things like mindless monsters, animals that the players kind of pet on the side of the street. All of these things are NPCs.
But inanimate walls are not.
Inanimate walls are not. That is correct.
Animate walls are.
Yep.
Inanimate walls aren't. Important distinction. Anyway, so when you're talking, when we're talking about NPCs, this is an incredibly broad topic: how to make unique and interesting and engaging NPCs.
Yeah.
It's like a super broad topic, so we really need like to set some ground rules to kind of where we're going to branch off from. Right? We need a solid framework, a solid groundwork of what are we really going to be looking at them in the context of. And really the key factor is what kind of purpose they serve in your world, right? What roles they fill. So I guess the first thing you got to think of is the reason you're using the NPC. That's the first kind of piece of context. Is what's kind of their role, right? What purpose do they serve for you as a game master? Usually not really something relevant to the players. This is just for you.
Yes. Understand
Then
kind of why you're putting any kind of given NPC into the game, and if that reason that you end up coming with yourself is because I have a really cool voice and I want to make sure that I get a chance to use that voice, well, that's not necessarily a bad reason to make an NPC, but you should also make sure that it's not just completely pointless for a character to be there. Assign that kind of cool voice to something that serves, a function in the game that you're running.
Yeah, and I guess that next part, right? The function, right? Their role, right? It's sort of tied to that reason, like Pete was saying, but it's what kind of purpose they're really going to show. Is this NPC someone that will, wants to be friends with the player characters, is on their side in whatever quest they're going for? Do they have opposing goals? Are they meant to be antagonistic? Maybe make the players rethink how they're acting about certain things. Though all of this kind of ties together into what role they serve and how they kind of move the plot forward, if they even engage the plot at all. We'll talk more about roles in a minute, but
Yeah.
and I guess
Well, I was
sorry,
gonna
go
say,
ahead.
kind of the third and another thing you really want to think about when you're figuring out how you want to frame your NPC is how important you plan to make this NPC, and that will never stay true over the course of the game. I can't tell you how many times I've made a throwaway NPC that the party decided that they loved, and then now all of a sudden it's thrust upon you to make that character central in some way to what's happening. But at the beginning, and the way you present an NPC will be changed fairly dramatically depending on how much you intend to kind of include and work that into the overarching story that you're developing with your players.
Yeah, and I mean that significance also can determine like if it's a very low significance NPC, you don't have to voice those NPCs. You can, you know, but if you go ahead and give a character a voice, that automatically boosts its significance and its importance in the eyes of players. So that's important to
Indeed.
kind of not just what significance you intend for it, but the significance that you show it, right? If you spend 5 minutes describing a guy on the side of the road with a cart and you just meant that to be a random guy on the side of the road, your players are going to think they're important when that was not your goal. Um, but anyway, understanding these things are kind of the core, our foundation, our groundwork. And no, Farfel, we don't just make NPCs so that your characters can or your players can love them and then kill them off and break the characters' hearts. No, that's not what this is about.
You can
This is
do that.
about creating an engaging experience.
Indeed.
So, um, let's kind of talk about different kind of types of NPCs, how we really use them. Really, we're focusing on that role kind of thing.
Mhm.
Pete, what are some common roles that we have for NPCs?
Well, there are sort of. I would divide them into kind of three categories. We've talked about one, and I don't think it needs a lot of discussion, and those are the one off NPCs. These are the NPCs that are just there because your players needed to speak with a passerby to get directions. They needed to walk into. They needed to walk into a tavern and collect like a single rumor about what's going on in the new town that they're entering into. So there's these kind of like throwaway NPCs, and those are NPCs that you don't put a lot of thought into. Maybe you don't voice them, and then over time, if the players decide to, because it's interesting. At any time, your players can just decide to make a character important by interacting with them a lot. But these are characters that are just assumed to be in the background unless they are brought to the foreground by some other situation. Um, the next would be those that the DM puts into the foreground. These are the characters that are tied in with your plot, your kings of nations, that you know that the players are going to have to go in and sort of treatise with at some point. Your villains fall into this category. Your kind of DM, I don't want to use the term DM PCs because it's fairly loaded, but your allies, players that are joining in with the players to accomplish various goals. So I would call those kind of your plot NPCs.
And of course, last but not least, we have the one-off NPCs, throwaways you improvise on the spot, um, because
We're
of some
not,
kind of either unexpected player action or what have you. They can be,
well,
the minions of villains that don't really matter. They can be a whole bunch of things. I see there's a really great comment in the chat right now from V Bunny saying quest giver, and that's actually not really interesting thing about quest givers. Whenever you're DMing, I feel, and Pete, I mean, I'm sure you agree with me on this one, but when you're DMing in Dungeons and Dragons, it's not the it's not you, the DM, who's doing bad things. It's the enemy that's doing the bad things, the villain, right?
yes,
It's not a predetermined fate what happens to your character in a fight. It is the roll of the dice. It is RNG, right?
indeed.
Now that's not always the case. You strive to be that to make it that way, but the illusion, right, that everything is how it seems, that as a DM you are ready for the circumstance. And it's kind of that um we're hiding things, right? We're all smoke and mirrors, making it feel authentic and real. And quest givers, when an NPC feels like a quest giver, that they're just there to give you a quest and that's it, a lot of the times that can feel really inauthentic.
It starts to
So
feel
generally,
less like a world and more like a video game, which is a common thing
yeah.
to see with those kind of characters because people go into D&D with a lot of tropes and ideas that they pick up from video games, which is fair.
Yeah, and so that's something we're going to talk about shortly. Those NPCs would fall under the hub NPCs usually, right? There's
Hmm.
something important that the DMs put into the game for you to interact with to get a quest from, right? To learn and to go experience things. But
And this
um,
idea of like a
yeah,
hub NPC that also falls in the categories of just NPCs that are tied to a location that the players can kind of always go to. And I think most DMs have several of these. Your beloved shopkeepers, your beloved tavern owners, those type of characters that are just they're always going to be behind some counter ready to sell you things. Uh, or working at the entrance to a gate or manning some important portal or whatever it is in the context of your world.
actually, I see a great comment. Max Meister in the chat talking about one-off NPCs I had in an episode of DnDTime, a pair of kobolds, Kobe and Boldo. And they were just supposed to be they were supposed to be setting, not even interactable NPCs. But you know what, Max, you liked them, and now they're things. And now, when we'll come back to them, I've actually been meaning to, but we haven't gotten her.
Kobe and Boldo are very good names.
Yeah, great names for a pair of kobolds.
Also,
I
welcome,
think
Demon Lord
Boldo
Nemi.
died. Build a
So,
Space Wheel is not a one-off NPC.
um,
Absolutely not. Sorry,
so
go ahead. Pete.
well, no, just to move on. When we begin sort of making, so we're gonna begin trying to make our NPCs stand out, and we're gonna be talking. I think for the most part, we're gonna be talking about the more kind of flashy NPCs, the ones
Yeah.
that you care about in the grand scheme. We're not gonna spend a ton of time talking about those improvised ones or the ones that you make up on the fly. And if you want a reference for that, I think we did talk about those two at least to a fair degree in our improvisation kind of series, so to speak, we were doing a while back. Um, but let's talk about the ones that you're actually going to prepare. So you want to create some
Mhm.
NPCs that your players are going to really like. So we're going to start combining those two ideas. We're going to think about the reason that you're putting them in and how important you want them to be, kind of what type of role you want them to serve in the world, and then start giving them attributes that suit. the types of things that you want to do with that NPC. So the first thing I think to talk about is when you introduce an NPC for the first time, you want to like grab your players with it. You want them to
Yeah.
have an instant connection to that individual, and that connection can be anything. It does not necessarily have to be a positive connection. I think everyone loves it when they make someone, and then you can feel in your group when all the players just fall in love with that character because they, and usually those are the ones that are really goofy or just very happy, very kind of have big personalities. Um, sort of your characters in the like. Who do you think in D&D time? I think characters in the world like I think of a Clinton Slaughter Murder or a Trash King in the land of D&D time as ones that are very over the top and leave kind of a very strong impression when you meet them. And Clinton in a much different way.
Well,
Uh,
and I think that's something to kind of consider, right? It's the personality and the other kind of facets that you think about is the appearance of the character that can really have a striking impact, but also the incident, right? What kind of incident is in the manner in which you meet this
that's a great
character?
point.
In D&D time, there's really not a lot of chance for nuanced incident, but it can be just as striking for a dungeon master if you want your players to like a character and your players don't like the town guard, having them run into that NPC for the first time after they're being like thrown out of somewhere by the town guard. That's a really good way to put them on the same page, right? Characters will remember that. Oh, you also hate the town guard. Thinking about those kinds of little incidental tie-ins can be really helpful.
For sure.
But
Um, so you mentioned appearance a little bit.
yeah,
So let's talk a little bit about that. So one of the things that you're going to do when you introduce a character is odds are you're going to describe what they look like, because that's what you do as a DM. You just say what things look like and you say what they do. And describing a character, I don't think, and there's a couple of schools of thought here. You can go into incredible detail and be really rich with it.
no.
I don't think you want to do that. Well,
Yep.
it's an option, and I respect people who that's their style if that's what they like to do. But I think you want to really kind of focus in and choose a couple of small points uh, to really focus on and let become what defines the way that individual character looks. So
I'm gonna go so far as to disagree and just say don't be a Tolkien. Don't describe your NPCs like you describe it to a screenwriter who's casting your adventure as a movie. All right, don't do that.
yes,
Don't go into that much detail.
you don't want to be a Tolkien. You want to be a J.K. Rowling in this regard. Um, J.K., which is not a joke. J.K.
No.
Rowling is actually really fantastic about this.
Yep.
For anyone familiar with the Harry Potter series, and I just assume that most people are, you can think back on all of those characters, and pretty much every character has one thing about them that's iconic. You can look at, say, Harry Potter has a lightning bolt scar on his forehead. Ron Weasley, freckles and red hair, as do every Weasley. You can look at Snape, greasy black hair, crooked nose. Dumbledore, half moon spectacles. Like all of these people have a very iconic thing that you could just hear a lot of those character descriptions out of context and still know that they were referring to those characters because of like how iconic they become. If you heard Lightning Bolt Scar, you would instantly think of Harry Potter.
Absolutely. And those are really important things to think about when you're doing your description. Give the players one, two, or at most three details to really grasp onto and hold on to the character. And if they ask for more, you can give them a little more detail, but be fairly broad with it. So, for example, an NPC may have a single earring that hangs from one ear that has like a jewel on it, kind of like maybe it's or a half or a lightning bolt scar or half moon spectacles. All of these things are one core facet that the players will remember. Right? They'll be all right. That's who that guy is. That's who that NPC is. Um, if you go and describe a whole bunch of other details, like if you then describe their hair color and the cut of their hair, and maybe that they have a scarf too, and all sorts of other things along with that one important detail, it can get muddled. And
Yeah,
the last
that
thing you
detail
want
doesn't
is
come
to
through.
to have come up with like a uniquely defining detail that makes sense, right? That isn't just super over the top. Um, and then have the players forget it because you spent 5 more minutes describing the stripes on their pants, right? No one cares about that unless that's their big thing, right?
Unless
If they
that's
have
the
very
thing,
colorful pants.
striped pants might be their thing. And it's okay to make sure you keep doubling down on what this thing is. Like when that
Mm,
character is introduced, uh, again, like if they meet him again down the road, um, you can start off by describing that thing that you defined them with last time. You can describe, you see a figure walking down the road with a bright pair of striped pants. And now the characters are instantly thinking, like, wait, we know someone who wears striped pants before you've even said who they are. And you're kind of creating those, like, invoking past memories and creating those connections and also reaffirming something about the character that you've kind of established early on.
yeah, and not all things about appearance necessarily have to be um what they're wearing, right? It could
Yes.
be other facets. It could be a tattoo. It could be their haircut, right? It could be a scar or injury. Not everything has to be super over the top, though. It could just be the person wears many rings. It can be all sorts of different things. They have a very specific pair of very nice boots. Um, or maybe they have a special way they walk, right? A kind of quirky gait
Yeah, a limp,
that's just
something along
yeah.
those lines.
Those are also really important. Maybe they were constantly scratching the back of their head. All of these tiny little notes, right, that kind of come up, and maybe they stutter a lot. And these are all different things that you can use to help to identify that all fit under that appearance without necessarily being a visual appearance. There's an auditory appearance that's very important as well. Arguably more important in a theater of the mind role playing.
I would definitely agree that kind of, and I don't like to kind of prescribe voices as a way to prescribe voices as a DM, but in making an NPC really stand out quickly, a funny voice is going to be kind of like one of the number one tools in your arsenal if you like to do voices. Um,
And I mean, Jericho in the chat is saying a voice pattern is also very good for describing a person. Yeah, I think we talked about that last time too. Simply the cadence with which they speak can do quite a bit
yeah,
versus, just kind of talking and going on. And if you take those deliberate pauses, or maybe they say at the end of all of their things, yeah,
um, yeah,
right, all these little nuance.
they can have a like a a signature phrase that they throw at the end of all of their uh
Oh.
at the like an I'll betcha at the end of every sentence.
I want to point another one out. Farfel. There's also a lot of subjective stuff you can use, like describing characters handsome, beautiful. I love that you mentioned that because in the new adventure, Waterdeep Dragon Heist, one of the very first NPCs that you meet is expressly and explicitly the only feature that's really relevant to that NPC that comes up in the book. They're incredibly beautiful. They're kind of dandy like, and it's just like that's it. That's their thing, and it's just
They're just
funny.
good looking.
I mean, there's a little bit more than that, but it's still like it's pretty good.
No, that sounds
But like
sounds
that's
delightful.
their main shtick.
So you've spoken about appearance. Let's talk about more kind of as we're moving now into I think the category fairly
Yeah,
naturally of these kind of like vocal tics and things that define them in the way they speak and mannerisms. I would say that this would fall under the blanket term of personality. And in the same way that you didn't get carried away with describing their appearance, don't get carried away with giving them a really complex personality. It's okay if that is what a character is. It's okay if your idea and your vision of a character is for them to be this really complex individual with a whole lot of kind of like inner turmoil and goals, and you have all of this stuff prepared for this character, but that's not going to get a chance to come across in something like a first meeting. When your player characters interact with your NPCs, you have a very kind of limited window, usually, depending on the circumstances, in which to show off what that character is. So focus on one idea about this character that you want to get across and continue to kind of nail that home over and over again.
absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I really love when I'm talking about a character's personality, especially with the more thuggy kind of characters, right? I like the kind of the trope, and this is not just for D&D, this is in movies or all sorts of stuff, but the trope of the character that insults you every time the first time they see you. It's just like, how's it going, shithead? And it's just a great big smile. And it's their way of saying, hey, how's it going? I missed you. How you been? But they just call you shithead every time. And it's just like, maybe this character is a reliable character and you're friends with this character, and even though maybe they're a little shady, whatever. And then it's great, that kind of stuff, right? Because when characters or players get frustrated and then they come to this NPC and the NPC is like, "Oh, how's it going, shithead?" And it's like, "It's going real bad.
Just having
Don't call me
just
shithead right now.
having a bad day.
Having a bad day. My friend just died. Player character out." And then we gotta get a resurrection going to get the character back and all sorts of stuff.
Absolutely. Well, Jericho is saying, like an NPC that looks like a thuggish brute, has a skull tattoo on his right arm and speaks with a methodical tone, is an example of a basic NPC that has a few key details that gives the player a good canvas to start out with, and then some details to put into their imagination. Yeah, absolutely. That's all very simple, straightforward. That's a character that they would instantly kind of connect to. And also, I like the description of thuggish brute, because when you describe a character like that, you can use descriptions that kind of add some context to an individual. Like saying that they're kind of rough and dirty looking doesn't carry the same context as saying that they are brutish looking. Because when you say brutish, you automatically assume that this individual is a little bit shady. They're probably looking for a fight, and it's okay to like play your hand a little bit on NPCs with players. Like to call a character a thug or a brute is fine
Yeah.
if you want to get that idea across to your players.
Likewise, noble or dandy. These are also terms that like players have an idea of what they're getting. Even if you're using a term more like prude, right, which maybe has some different weight to it, players will often immediately think of a reserved, kind of quiet character, right? And that just the word prude just gave that character more personality than they maybe would have otherwise had. I also like the very generic, like, I said the how they greet you, also how they leave, right? Is another big thing. Maybe they have a thing they do. Maybe the big shtick about this character. They're otherwise a fairly generic noble, but they tip really well. Maybe, right? Maybe that's kind of their thing. They always leave a big tip for um, wherever they're at, right? Whether it's the newsboy on the street or
Mhm.
the barmaid at the tavern. They just leave a big old platinum piece sitting there, and just maybe they just kind of quietly leave after that, right? They don't make a big deal of it. And that is an important defining factor of like, because what that tells you is that gives you more detail and insight as to their personality. They actually care about other people to some degree, right?
Mm,
And I mean, for a noble, that can mean a lot, right? That can give characters
absolutely.
a lot of um, investment, maybe in a character, an NPC that they just thought was a one off. Oh, they need us to go do a quest for them. They're hiring us to do a thing. Oh, but this guy isn't actually all that bad, even though he's noble scum.
Yeah, they have like this leaving like a big tip, like Jeremy was saying, that might give the players a like this odd perceived connection to the character that they wouldn't have otherwise had. Like, oh, that's what we would have done too. We have a lot in common with this individual, and it's easy to kind of it's easy to kind of work some of these details um, in theory, but sometimes it's a little bit harder in terms of actual practice to get some of these like nuanced things to pay off. But like thinking about them beforehand can be really helpful. A lot of this stuff
Oh
is
yeah,
great to prepare. Um,
and with a lot of these things, right? I've seen people come up with lists of NPCs that they prepare. Don't waste your. I mean, you can do that. I don't want to say waste your time because like that works for certain people. But for me, if I just have like 3 or 4 of these little quirks written down and I need to improvise a character on the spot, I just kind of glance over, all right, and boom, I've got my thing. They wear ragged brown jeans and have a strange beaded kind of anklet on, um, bearing a bone holy symbol of Baal. Right, simple, straightforward, and immediately, right, I just invoked a holy symbol. I invoked lore, which gave you an impression of, okay, this character might be bad, right?
mm,
Because characters might know Baal is the god of death or something, or god of murder, I think.
yeah,
Right.
Ball is
Yeah,
Ball's
Baal's
a
murder.
devil. right?
No, Ball is not a devil. Ball's a god, Pete. Ball's a god.
Who am I thinking
He's a
of?
god, my boy. Who you thinking of?
Who am I thinking of?
There might be more than one Ball.
Fair enough. Um,
I don't know.
fair. Jeremy, I'm actually just curious now. There's a slight diversion. Where do you put your prep work? If you had like a very limited time into prep, where would you put your prep work? Just curious.
Very limited time into prep.
Yeah, so you have like a half an hour to prep a 3 hour session. What would you devote your prep work to?
Depends on how I'm doing it. I'm assuming you mean a live session,
Um,
not
uh,
like using Roll20 or something.
yeah.
Because in Roll20, it'd probably be
In getting your stat blocks and stuff all on
yeah.
Roll20 and yeah.
Um, and live, and I have nothing pre-prep.
Yeah.
It would probably be coming up with a couple of key NPCs, um, and a couple of interesting ways that like the plot will, in fact I can tell you right now, it's taking a couple of NPCs that players already have and coming up with interesting and engaging ways that the world will interact with them, because the players, if they've met this NPC and they're traveling with NPCs, I'm pulling from my current Tomb of Annihilation game,
Mm.
they already have opinions on them. And having the world interact with those NPCs in ways that may be contrary to the player's beliefs get them to question things and really engage a lot more deeply. If they think an NPC is cool and on their side, and the world acts toward them, other forces act toward that NPC in ways that make that NPC look bad, well, now the players have a choice, right? Do they fight against what the world is trying to show and support that NPC, or do they betray that NPC, right? Or how invested are they? I guess
Absolutely.
that's what I would say. I'd focus pretty much entirely on NPCs.
That's actually what I was thinking too, which was just like um NPCs are
Long
just they're
answer
just
for a very
no,
easy
no, no.
question.
No. It was a very good answer. I was just also just thinking along the same lines that if I like really had to focus on something and I needed to rush a game, I would rather just make sure I have a couple of characters that I think are going to be really kind of engaging and interesting in a couple of moments like that, and let everything else kind of come as it may. Um,
Oh yeah, but
but
maybe that's just because of the experience we have. Like, I mean,
yeah,
I
I
can
guess
pull combat out of my butt. You know,
that is a very much an extension of not
I
having
can
to worry about prepping
I
stat
can
blocks.
sneeze a combat encounter in 5e.
Yeah, then that's from running a lot of D&D
A
time
lot of
and
Dungeons
various
and
things.
Dragons. Yeah.
But to get us back on track, and you were making some points I think are very much along the same lines of what I was thinking we could talk about next, is how to make an NPC more interesting in the long run. Because we've talked about how to get that first sort of big impression, but like you were just saying, uh, NPCs should have the opportunity, just like characters, to develop and sort of grow
Yeah.
as the game goes on. And through the way the world kind of interacts with them, and seeing other sort of forces and how they're perceived by other NPCs can be one great way to do it. And you can also just, there's other more simple ways to do it. But I'm of the opinion that kind of every time a player meets an NPC, they should have something about them that has changed, even if that's just, oh, they're carrying a piece of news that they didn't have before. Maybe
Mhm.
they're in conflict with another NPC that you kind of know about. Maybe if they're kind of a business, maybe if they're a shopkeeper, their shop is now very busy the next time that they come back, or maybe it's dead because they've fallen on some kind of hard times. But just things to show that when there's like big gaps in time between meeting NPCs, kind of demonstrate the passage of time for one thing, and also just to remind the players that these are, well, insofar as imagination goes, these are living, kind of breathing people
Yep.
in your world.
I really like, in terms of having something different going on in the NPC's life. That can be something that you just make up on the spot. That can be something you roll on a table if you want to like predetermine a whole bunch of different things. One of the ones I really like, if the characters have started becoming attached to an NPC, uh, is the NPC is in a relationship. Right? They come
That's
back
a
and
that's a very fun one.
the NPC has started seeing someone, and the players are like, "Oh," and one of the players is like, "Oh," and
Wait, wait, what is
Who
that?
is this
Wait,
person?
what is the person who's like, oh, thought process? Are they like, oh, I don't like this individual? Or are they like, I need to protect my NPC friend?
Yeah, exactly. It's
Oh,
like,
fair
what are you
enough.
gonna do? What are you gonna do to him, Jeremy?
Don't you don't you break his
Don't you
heart,
dare
Jeremy.
hurt my boy. But
um,
yeah, I mean, like having those little things, right? And because players will never, they almost never see that come. They're just
oh
like, wait,
yeah,
what? Because players don't think in terms of the world living around them, and creating that illusion that
the world
um,
moves.
the world moves, right, and the world exists even without them interacting is a huge. Albeit, you know, it. I want to take a step back. If you're rolling on a table, don't have married be on there. Like, they have a relationship now. Because, like, you don't want to be like, oh, well, I've seen 3 NPCs and wow, all of them have rolled the relationship. That's weird. It's just a really
Just
romantic time of year.
it's Valentine's
Maybe.
Day in your world. It's whatever that equivalent is.
Uh, Actually, that would kind of be funny. Anyway,
Um,
not the point.
everything is a mine for plot lines. Even this dumb idea of all your PCs having relationships.
But yeah, a lot of things. So moving forward, when you have an NPC and you've realized this NPC is going to show up more often, so they're not a one-off NPC. One-off NPCs should have these too usually, but they don't always have to. That is goals, right? What you think your NPC wants to achieve and thinks they can achieve. So, for example, the shopkeep. The shopkeep wants to, let's see, be successful, maybe open a second shop. That's a very reasonable goal
Yep.
for Hey, stop it. My cat's throwing stuff on me. What for an NPC shopkeeper to have, right? I want to open a second shop and do this and that and the other thing. Or if their shop's in decline, I want to not be in decline anymore. I want to save my shop. Or
Yes, and I like that particular example. Before we go into like the more general, because that example is a reward for the players that a player would likely become invested in to a certain extent. They'll want to support this individual. Like, well, if he opens up another shop, then we can go to that other shop, and we won't have to like travel all the way back to this town if he's going to open it like across the
where
other
we
side of
want
the
it.
continent. Yeah, we can just go to that version of the shop and not this one. So it's almost just for interacting with this NPC and um, spending time speaking to this shopkeeper in this example, they kind of level up his shop, so to speak, and kind of it's almost a player reward as much as it is feels realistic in line with the goals of your NPCs.
Well, exactly. In the face of Jericho saying in chat, sometimes they become literally invested in the shop. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, there's no better way to get a character invested than if they're literally invested. Hard, cold gold. Um, but besides just goals, other things I really love, I mean, a couple other simple goals, right? Is I want to get my kid to go to a good school, or, you know, goals for normal people.
good one.
But what I really love is thinking beyond just goals. What are their dreams? And I used to think I like to think of this for NPCs that I know will be recurring. I don't really think of dreams for one-off NPCs. They don't. That doesn't matter unless they become recurring.
I like the
Um,
idea of having a couple of those. I'm sorry if I could just slightly.
so please,
I like the idea of just having like, you know, Tom the guard keeper. Like when you walk by him as you move into the town, just oh, I dreamed that someday I'd live up in that castle. Point up to the thing
well,
on the hill, just like the small town person with huge aspirations.
I'll
Uh,
tell you, Pete. If you do that, that character's not going to be a one-off NPC.
yeah, they're no longer. They're now
Yeah,
important by the kind
yeah.
of the nature of that joke.
The
With
characters will remember that. The
Schrodinger's
players.
Schrodinger's dream. By
But
observing your dream, it becomes possible for it to be
yeah,
realized.
but exactly right. Their dreams, and that usually doesn't matter. So that shopkeeper, maybe their dream is to run the most valuable enterprise in all of the world, right? To run the shop empire of Fantasylandia, um, or maybe their dream is to kill the king who sentenced their parents to death for heresy,
Ooh.
and they run this shop and they've no goals of ever actually killing that king.
But they
But
think
if they
about it.
could, they would, and they want. And that's important because having those dreams, right? That's the next level. The things that might not readily be apparent. That if a player wants to spend time with an NPC, say they're having downtime and they're like, you know what, I just want to hang out with that NPC during my down because I like them. They were cool. And you're like, oh, and you look at their dream and say, yeah, no, you spend some time. Maybe you have them roll persuasion checks to like talk with the person, and they confide in you this kind of dream of theirs, right? That they someday would love to get revenge on the king for this horrible thing that he did. And then the player is like, wait, what did the king do? I thought the king was a good king. And you have these cool tie-ins to having these things be plot relevant can be good too, right? If like there's the good king who everyone sees is the good king, but he's not the good king.
Mm.
Um, Having that stuff be tied into NPC dreams can be really important, and it's also really important when the NPCs start getting dragged along. Like if a player gets a squire, what's that squire's goal?
Oh
Right,
yeah,
to be a hero. That's their dream.
that's so fun.
But
Squires are
maybe
the
it's
best.
not. Maybe that squire's real dream is to put the paladin who they're a squire under, in their place for treating them like crap all this time and never letting them go out and be the hero that they wanted to be. Because that's their goal, right? To be a hero. So what's their dream? It's not just to be a hero. There's something more to it. Maybe it is just be a hero, right? Maybe they're very idealistic. But maybe there's a dark twist on it.
But you can start to see the way that, like, just thinking about these NPCs, it's just really natural to start telling their stories. Just like the way that you get invested as a player in your characters when you think about them, and you spend a lot of time really focused on just one character, so you end up doing it so much more. There's all these little details and nuances that you end up coming up with. You can just apply these same ideas to NPCs and just don't take quite as long. And how long you end up planning on spending on an individual NPC, just divert a little bit of extra time into them, and it's just the ideas will just start to kind of like pour out over time, when you're thinking about these larger scale things and who they are as an individual. And it can really just come down to the trick of getting these things across and finding the moments for these NPCs to reveal who they are, and to show the players all of these cool things that you've like thought about them. Um,
Yeah, I mean, one of the ones I love was like the shopkeeper, or maybe they're not the shopkeeper, maybe they're like the smith or something like that. There's something like that. When you have their dream, maybe their dream right is to be a famous smith or something. I love that moment that sometimes reveals itself through no realization of the players that they put that NPC in a situation where they can actually get their dream, maybe right? They have been traveling together. They're doing like an archaeological dig, right? Or they're investigating some ruin, and they brought this NPC along, or they've rescued them, or whatever. And um, there's a point where there's a magic weapon on the ground, and the players are in a tense battle, right? And that NPC looks at that weapon and says, "I could take that, and I could run, and I could be set for life, and I could say I made it, and then they'll call me a master smith." And that NPC can think that because you just thought you took the second to think of what their crazy pipe dream is. That now the players are totally befuddled when that character runs forward, grabs the weapon, and runs. And the player's like, "What's going on?
the betrayal.
Betrayer!" But anyway, I'm gonna get wicked caught up in this.
Yeah,
Let's talk
so
about
just gonna say,
villains.
Farfel should say, where we're going to talk about villains. When did we start? We started a little bit late, so we're around a little bit late. We have until about 20 minutes left, right, Jeremy?
Something like that.
Um,
I love villains.
let's talk about villains, because villains are. I think that villains are underused in D&D time, and that is a weird
Yeah.
statement to make. And the reason that I'm saying that is because very often. Oh, my
Oh, Pete,
computer is
your
making a
face is all
beeping
frozen
noise.
again.
Oh, that's why. My computer started beeping at me very loudly. Um, so
All right, Pete. We'll get you back in a minute, buddy.
Yes, we'll be good. As I
You're
was,
not
as I was,
you're not as attractive a face right now. You're
yeah,
really
I
you
liked
look
my last
bad.
one. Just as always, I'm getting the short end of the Skype. Is a good band name? It's an okay band name. Villains. That's what we're talking about. Uh, a lot of the times villains end up being something that are a little bit more of a destination than an NPC and an important character in the story. The villains are relegated to this role where you hear about them and, there's rumors abound and you hear about the terrible things that they do, but they aren't characterized away in the way that a lot of your NPCs are, because the players don't get to interact with them until that big kind of battle where they fight said villain. And that is a waste of a great villain. If the players don't have a chance to interact with that villain and really get to know them and to learn why they're a villain and learn to hate that villain, then that's squandering your villain opportunity.
I completely agree. I'm just trying to fix Pete's webcam while you talk.
I'm sorry about that. Oh, keep going while we work on that. And it's easy to sort of make those. It's easy to make that mistake because it's a little bit tricky to introduce a villain to players before they have the chance to do so. Wait, Jeremy, what are you doing?
I'm just being obnoxious.
Stop being obnoxious.
I'm sorry, I'm being a villain. I'm ruining the show.
Oh wait. Is it because I understand now? You're speaking for me through the power.
That's what I was going for. Yeah, Pete, your thing is totally not working at all.
I don't know, man. We're just having bad luck lately.
Anywho, we'll just keep moving then. With Frozen Pete, you guys get the beautiful Frozen Pete today. Pete, you're still there, right?
Oh, I'm still here.
Okay, good. Yeah, no. So, villains. Getting to know your villains before they become villains is super, super critical. And I've seen an interesting thing that I've noticed a lot of DMs do, and I hate this. I get it. I understand the drive for it, but one way that people use villains that they introduce them and before they become the villain is they have it be the traitorous NPC. And it's not that I hate that in concept. You know what I mean, Pete?
Yeah.
It's just a lot of the time the execution is the thing I have a problem with. Do you feel similarly?
I am a little bit on the I'm a little bit on the fence. I feel similarly for sure. And I think that it's something that is definitely leaned on too heavily as a way to create an interesting villain, because that is just what makes them interesting isn't sort of who they are as a person and why they're doing the things they're doing, but more just sort of the fact that they are a betrayer that defines them as a villain, which I think isn't that exciting of a villain. But I think that it's okay to do it once or twice, and I wouldn't do it on a character that has defined them. I would rather it be kind of a side character that they didn't know that well that turns out to be a villain than the companion that they've trusted through years of adventuring turns out to have been the bad guy all along. That's the kind of thing I don't like. And again, like you said, it very much comes down to execution.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing to consider when you're doing something like that is why you're doing it, right? Why that NPC becomes a villain, becomes the villain, right? Or is the mastermind behind the whole. If you're creating that character solely for the purpose of being a gotcha to your players, you want to reconsider it, because that's, especially if you if your goal is to be a gotcha to your players, you want to reconsider it. Just straight and narrow. That's my personal feel. However, if your NPC is going to be, if they're going to do that, if that's something you want, I personally feel like you need to set your NPC up in a certain way so your characters don't like them to begin with. So the noble that they have to work with and they begrudgingly work with, that they're okay with, but they really don't like that much, that betrays them, and then they get to finally kill that NPC, right? That is a good villain, NPC turned villain. Like Pete was saying earlier, the wizard that's been adventuring with them for decades, and then betrays them suddenly for no reason is a bad one.
Yeah, that's the kind of the worst case example. Um, but anyway, I think we're mostly on the same page. When if you're doing this kind of thing, it's just a question of analyzing the reasons why you're doing it and being careful not to be just too much of a basically too much of a dick about it. But there are other more kind of simple and I think for the most part better ways to create an interesting villain and to have a villain that the players get to know and get to really interact with before just this thing other than having them meet him in a context where they're not the villain. And meeting a villain in the context where they're the villain and you're unable to kind of battle them or confront them directly can be really dramatic and interesting. And there's a few different ways. I think is the one that I see most commonly is the one where the players meet the villain while they're too powerful, while the villain's too powerful for them to deal with, and the villain kind of like wipes the floor with them, and they have this sort of kind of moment where the villain's like, haha, you're not even worth my notice. I'll leave you here alive on the ground, which is uh, it's a little bit played. A lot of the times, it can just feel like a very meaningless encounter if that's the strategy that you end up going with. I'm not going to say it's completely ineffective, and I'm sure that there are times where it has worked really well. I personally haven't gotten that shtick to work really well, and I think it's very hard to make that happen.
I mean, basically, the gist of it. So in that case, right, where the villain just wipes the floor with them, or where the PC, who's their good friend, randomly betrays them. These are the NPC betraying the party to become a villain, and like this is the villain being a dick. And if the villain's being a dick, that's not usually a good thing. That's not if it's being a dick to the players, it's bad, right? Being a dick to their characters is one thing or another, but being a dick to the players sucks. Just getting your ass handed to you feels bad, not fun. And it might make for dramatic storytelling, but you really have to be careful with how you do it. And yes, Pete is now back,
Oh,
Shiva.
it's good to be here, everybody.
Um,
So let's talk about some like cool things that you can do that aren't these things.
yeah.
Some like good ones.
Well,
As
one of the big struggles I think I just before we jump into this, one of the big struggles that a lot of players have or characters have, right? Or players have, DMs have. There we go.
people have
People got is if you want to put that NPC in there earlier, that villain in earlier, there's the struggle that well, what if they kill him? What if they kill the end? What if they kill the villain? Uh, and Pete, how do you handle that? Right? How do you set it up so that you don't cheat the players out of their victory, but they don't
there
just
are
kill the NPC?
I mean, there are a lot of ways. Those are one to give the NPC some kind of very easy escape route. Um, be it they have the ability to, misty step away. They have, the teleport spell if they're a higher level enemy, so that they can just zip out on a moment's notice. They have some type of backup plan where a whole bunch of their minions arrive to kind of go in and protect them and to clog up the way so that they are able to get out safely, and the players are kind of forced to deal with um, that individual's minions instead of them while they make an escape. But I think the opportunity for these kind of clashes, and those are very cinematic, aren't they? Where you have this almost superhero like vibe of, you know, the heroes and the villains are both after kind of a mutual thing or pursuing a similar goal, be it the villain, the villain's going to attack this location and they're trying to protect it, or the villain's going to steal this artifact and they need to make sure it isn't stolen. And win or lose, if the stakes of whatever the conflict they're going to come into are not life and death, if they are, protect or not protect, without directly going to harm either the players or the villain, then you can create an interesting story where they get to interact with the villain and have a conflict with them without actually, coming to blows and ending the thing once and for all in that moment.
I also really like that. I like that. Give them an alternative. So when you have the players versus the villain and it's a fight, and you don't want the villain to die at that moment, sometimes you just get screwed. Sometimes the players will just, the horde of guys, minions swarm in, and the rogue says, "Guys, I'm going for it." And that rogue's gonna die because there's like six bugbears around this,
Yeah.
this orc boss, and that rogue goes for it to kill the big bad. And when you put your characters in that position, when you put your players in that situation, that can happen. So
Yeah.
like Pete just mentioned, the alternative conflict where you're not directly fighting, but you're going for a similar goal. You're not in direct conflict, but that character's there in the background. The big bad is there. Is a really good way of doing that. Of not putting them in a direct conflict where they could just murk your boss.
In the same way, if you're familiar with a villain, you can have them interact with the villain in neutral territory to both of you, an area in which neither of you are allowed to harm the other one because of some outside circumstances. So you have this kind of opportunity for direct dialogue and to conflict on a more personal and kind of more, I think, a more kind of real and philosophical level, and to speak with the villain and learn why they're doing the things that they're doing. But you can't actually harm them because you're both in this kind of protected state. Be it like, the fancy dinner party of the king. You can't cause trouble at this place, even though you know the villain and you know that they're there sitting at the table.
Yep.
Or, just uh, under the guise of some powerful being that is more powerful than either of you, that are preventing you two from clashing.
I completely agree. I like that a lot. Another thing I really like is having the villain be there while something else is going on. So, in the example I mentioned, bugbears. Let's say it's this powerful orc warlock, right? And that's who the big bad villain is. And he has his bugbear minions, his cohorts, and they're fighting stuff. And your players bust into the throne room, right? Of this small keep that they've overrun, and they're beating down the bugbears, and they get to the point where they think they're going to fight the orc guy, but then the orc guy's not there, and you can figure that out really simply by just having, they know the orc guy's been there the whole time. Well, there are spells in the game. Mislead is a great spell, um, that you can use to. You can give the characters those spells. You can give villains those spells. Death Ward is another really good one.
Yep.
Mislead. Giving these things that the players have access to makes it feel a lot more fair,
Fair, yeah.
when it looks like the NPCs cheat. Um, because the worst thing is you've defeated this guy, you've got him cornered, he goes to teleport and you counterspell his teleport and you stab him through the heart and you beat him up because you get your crit on your last hit. You know he's on the brink of hell, on the brink of death, and you kind of just bullshit save the NPC,
Yeah.
the villain, and that sucks. Players hate that. It's
That
the
feels
worst
bad.
feeling in the world.
Yep.
But if the twist is, oh, he wasn't there the whole time. Holy shit, it was just an illusion the
It's the
entire
end.
time.
Oh, and I almost just spoiled the movie. I'm
Damn.
not going to spoil The Last Jedi.
But
I was just thinking of.
I'm just saying, like, that's an excellent way to do that, right? To make it feel fair and to make that villain feel like they're a step ahead of the game.
Oh yeah.
Look at the spells and the things in the existing book. Hell, the simulacrum spell, an excellent way to have a high level NPC. They don't even have to be a spellcaster, right? They can be a total brute, warlord who has a spellcaster
Yeah.
as a
Yep.
an advisor.
And
right?
that's cool. That's really cool too.
Like the simulacrum spells are a great way because they kill him. They're like, what's going on? And he melts.
Like
And they're like,
melts. It like melts
"What's
into this
going
sort of
on?"
chrome. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Um,
it's just cool. It feels so much better when they're playing by the rules, so to speak. And having a couple of these outs, right? Those outs are never the out until you need them to be the out.
mhm.
It's not a simulacrum until you say it melts into snow and becomes a simulacrum. So
Yeah.
that's something
Pretty
really important to note, is kind of appears, to view behind the screen.
Um,
You can just assume that that character's there until they go down, and then yes, it was this simulacrum. You see the melt, right? You have that in your back pocket. Just
and as one more kind of example is a way that you can a way that you can let the characters get to meet a villain and kind of let the villain grow with the heroes over time. And rather than being an NPC that betrays them, you can still take this concept of them meeting the villain at an early stage before they understand that they're a villain. Maybe this person gets into a bar fight at the bar that they're at, and gets a little bit too physical and beats the hell out of the person at the bar, and the heroes have to like step in and push them out. And that's not a thing where, unless they're a real murder party, they're going to decide like, oh well, we have to finish this person off. But now they have this context where this is someone who takes things way too far. This is someone who is aggressive, and they have these thoughts on this individual when they walk off. And then later, when this person is kind of leading a crime syndicate that the players are in conflict with, well, they have a lot of context for like, oh, this is the guy from that bar fight. Like, we know who this person is to a degree. So you can take some of these ideas, because I think the idea of the betrayal, or meeting the player hero before the players are strong enough to deal with it. These things have foundations that can be useful if not taken to like some of the extremes that we were talking about before.
And I like that kind of stuff. I also like you were just saying with the bar, they have no idea they're even a villain at that point,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And that's great. That's a really nice thing to. My cat's being bad. Sorry, guys. That's a good thing to see, and that's a good thing to do. I really like maybe like the noble, right? And that's just what the players see as they're coming into town. Is they see a bunch of people like about to be hung or something, right? For some sort of dumb crime that the noble has accused them of, or said they did. Maybe they did it, maybe they didn't. But it still is like a brutal thing, right? To watch people, the party walks into town and there are people who are about to die. And just talking around and knowing that it was the noble who sentenced those people can be like, that can be damning.
Absolutely. That's a really cool
Sorry,
one.
my
I
cat.
really like that example. So
Without even them having to be there, right? That's the best part. Or worse, they're watching. Oh,
yeah, and have a when you have the opportunity, try and let try and humanize your villains a little bit. I mean, sometimes it's great to have a villain that's just truly despicable and awful, but it's, I think, more often than not nice when the players can see at least some kind of track of logic or some defining thought that could, to an extent, justify the actions that the villains are taking. Like, they should at least be able to understand how the villain thinks, not just, this person just is killing because they like to kill. I like it like, well, they're killing nobles because, their parents were wrongfully sentenced to death by a noble at one time. There should be some kind of train that the players have the opportunity to follow if they want to.
yeah, and just because they're a villain doesn't mean they don't follow the same kind of shtick as NPCs, right?
Indeed.
Of other NPCs. So think of their goals, what they think they can achieve, and think of their dream, what they can own, like their pipe dream. And villains, I often see them like, it's the villain reaching for the stars to become the god. Having a more down to earth villain, especially earlier in the game, can be really cool. And maybe they start as this very down to earth villain, but as they, and of course the party, discover things along the way, maybe they see that maybe their crazy dream is more and more a reality.
Yeah, their dreams become more grandiose over time.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a really cool way to look at it, having that like that small town, you know, orc crime warlock guy or crime boss becomes a warlock to some evil deity that's uncovered and gains all this power and has his real goal of, I don't know, something evil probably.
He wants to someday rule the city.
There we go.
That's it for D&D Time Talks. I think we're about time, Jeremy.
Yeah, my brain is
Uh,
melting out.
And actually, I want to just comment on a nice comment here from Jericho. A villain never perceives themselves as the villain. Yeah, absolutely. You can just think of your villains as you would most NPCs. They're just NPCs that got a little bit of meanness in them somewhere. They got something wrong somewhere down there,
Absolutely.
or just in conflict in some way. So with that, this was a massive topic, one that I don't think we could ever fully cover. No one could ever fully cover this topic except perhaps a full book. Um, so yeah, Jeremy, that's it. You got anything else you want to say on the subject?
Not on the subject, but again, Matty Morgs will be streaming in just a moment. Or maybe I think his normal starting time is in about an hour, but I might be 10 minutes. I'm not sure which. Check him out, twitch.tv/Matty Morgs, or we'll be hosting him right here. So just wait, and the channel should hop right over.
Absolutely.
I don't know what he's doing this evening, but it's always a great time over at his channel. So
Ooh.
go hang out. And my cat is screaming in the background. Actually, similar concepts, he says. We made NPCs setting last week, and yeah, I guess that's where he's continuing to work on. I know some NaNoWriMo stuff going on there, so it should be interesting.
Indeed. Well, I hope to see you all there. I certainly will be. And Jeremy, we have announcements. Friday, we have Pete and Jeremy's D&D time. We rerun 3 one-shots with our viewers. If you're interested in playing for that, is sign-ups still open for that? Or have you closed sign-ups now? There's still sign-ups, so if you're interested in playing, it's never too late. We should have another boss battle this week, assuming that we have the people for it, but I imagine that we will.
Presumably.
Yes. It is highly likely that we will have another boss battle this week. So that's Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then on Sunday, there will be DnDTime Delves.
Oh, wow.
We
might not have a boss battle. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh. Well, there will be adventures, I can tell you that much. D&D will be played upon this day. Or my name isn't Pete, which it is. And then on Sunday, there's DnDTime Delves, where Jeremy takes everyone through a sort of a dungeon crawl adventure. They're usually 3 or 4 hours long. And this week, I will not be participating in that. We have Mr. Plunderloot of DnDTime community jumping in to play with us. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Which one did you, what was the name of the adventure you ended up going with? Did you go with the one that...
The adventure, I believe, is entitled Bahamut's Shame.
Yes, Bahamut's Shame. That was such a cool adventure title.
It really is. So, of those adventures, some of them have such inspired titles, and other ones are just like Orc Stronghold. If you guys had picked Orc Stronghold, I would have been pissed.
That would have been funny as hell. Just
so dumb.
Just...
If that was a level 3 adventure, I would have punished the absolute shit out of you.
I want to play Castle of the Hobgoblin.
That actually kind of sounds okay. Anyway, not the point. Check us out Friday and Sunday, and then we've got more stuff coming up next week. Check our announcements on Discord for our full schedule. But yeah, with that, that's the end of our announcements, right?
Yeah, I think that's it.
All right, I'm Jeremy.
And I'm Pete, and this is DnDTime Talks.
Bye!